All right. Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, look, let me tell you, it's interesting that we are in the back to school season, but the discrepancy between when people go to school and when
Hmm.
they're still just hanging out is very interesting to me between like K through 12 and college, because
Yeah, yeah.
I've got friends of mine who teach at a university level that have been working for at least a month now. Got other folks where they've got little bitties that still haven't quite gone back yet. And everything in between, it's like, of
Hmm.
course, the system doesn't work for us, does it? Of course it doesn't.
No,
Of course.
no. Why would there be any consistency whatsoever?
None whatsoever. None of the systems talk to one another. None of them. So anyway, here we are. I'm just grateful that mine have gone back to school, and
Hmm.
we can figure out a pattern. Let's put it that way. I think this is the time of year where you're trying to figure out a pattern, at least while you still have daylight. So here we are.
Oh
So
goodness, at least while you still have daylight. Oh, winter's coming.
winter is coming. It is. It's just, I mean, just some of the basic functional stuff that I I enjoy doing that I take for granted in the spring and summer that I can no
Hmm.
longer do in fall.
Yeah,
Like,
yep.
you know, Kendrick will have like late practice on the field, but depending on the field, it may or may not have lights, which means, of course, I'm not going to walk in the dark, which, like,
Right, right.
yeah, starts putting a cramp in my style. That's what I'm saying. Cramp in my style.
Oh gosh, those darn seasons, they're totally cramping your style.
But I still think there's an argument for anyone who's saying that they do not want to change the times. I'm like, yeah, I
Hmm.
don't want to change time anymore. I just pick a struggle, y'all.
Right.
Pick one.
Yeah.
Pick one and stick
Just
with
choose
it,
it
you
and stick
know?
with it. Yeah, yep,
Yeah,
100%.
exactly. I mean, aren't there places like Phoenix that don't change? Like there's certain places in the country that,
Arizona. Yeah,
okay, Arizona broadly. Okay. So I'm
yeah.
like, pick something. I wanna do what they're doing. That's what I want to do here. So all right. Well, let's dive into this week's word of the week. All right, Dr. Lisa, this was news to me, even though I've been grappling with the gig economy. I've been participating in the gig economy for years, obviously, but I thought it was interesting to look at this definition of the gig economy. If you're listening to us right now, you may be participating in it and you didn't know you were participating in it, or maybe you did know, you just didn't have the language for it. So check this out, y'all. The gig economy. It's a labor market where companies hire independent workers for short term, flexible jobs instead of full time, long term employment. Now, Lisa, you and I both participated for years as adjunct faculty members and possibly even other roles and jobs. But I did not know that this word gig comes from a musician's slang for a single performance, which makes complete sense that you're stringing together these single
Yeah.
performances, right? In
Hmm.
order to cover the bills here. And so now this is the very same thing as workers that are freelancers, independent contractors, or gig workers. They get paid by the project or the task or even the ride if you are a rideshare driver, for example,
Hmm.
rather than a fixed yearly salary. Now, Lisa, what I think is really interesting about this too is that there's really no consensus on numbers around who's participating in the gig economy. We're just noticing that it is
Okay.
picking up. And part of the
Hmm.
reason we don't have any strong numbers is because we just can't agree on what it is. Like the first thing I thought of, Lisa, before I even looked at some of the Bureau of Labor Statistics and definitions and so forth is, all right, are we talking about people that solely make their living off of gig economy or people that have a full-time job and they're layering
Right.
gig economy on top of it? Like those were the things I was
Hmm.
already about. Similarly, the smart folks that do this work probably are thinking the same way. How do we even define it? there's one definition that focused on specifically, quote, electronically mediated work to represent short jobs or tasks that workers find through websites or mobile apps that connect them with customers and arrange payment for the task. And so I thought that was interesting as well.
Mhm.
So, and again, I'm well out of my element here, but I even thought about, let's say, a taxi driver that doesn't really use electronically mediated work may not be part of the gig economy, but a Uber driver, Lyft driver that
Mm,
functions with an app might be counted in the gig economy, which is
right,
why
right.
the number is so slippery, even though they're doing the very same job, right?
Hmm.
So the technology has a bit to do with this here. But based on the numbers that I found, this gets really interesting because the numbers have continued to trend up, obviously, for the last few years. There was a publication that came out in September of 2018 that said this type of work accounted for about 1% of total employment in 2017. But now I'm like, yeah, okay, we can tell what type of economy we're in right now because as of this past year, 36% of the entire US workforce is participating in gig
Hmm.
economy. That's around 72.9 million to 76.4 million Americans. I'm again wondering from a data perspective because we like data, Lisa, is that due to the way we're counting what gig economy
Yeah, it might
is,
be. Hmm.
or the economic ecosystem that we're living in now that necessitates it, or both? Probably both, I would think. So yeah, I thought this was interesting that it connected to music, and I can't say that I'm necessarily surprised either. I just went to lunch with a girlfriend of mine who works a full-time job, and she's like, "Yeah, I want to get closer to retirement, but the math is not mathing right now. I need to get something in addition to this." And
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, she's flirting with the gig economy, clearly, trying to figure it out.
Hmm. Hmm.
Trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I think that, the freelancers, independent contractors, etc., have been around forever, right? But for me, it feels like the term gig economy really took off after Uber and Lyft became a really popular thing.
Okay. Okay. There you go.
That was when we started hearing about it. And so then, obviously, as apps began to develop, you've got your Task Rabbits and other things like that. And so
Mhm.
it's exploded. But I also think your point is true that the economy is such that for a lot of people, this is the only way they're able to make ends meet, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. It's not enough. Well, and I think we've talked about this before in another capacity specifically, but just around how it wasn't exactly living wage that we talked about before, but we did talk about how, you know, today's price is not yesterday's price, y'all. The things that, sometimes
Hmm.
parents and even grandparents are like, oh, you have a full-time job, so you can buy a house, right? Get over here. No, we cannot buy a
Yeah.
house, right? Like we're, it's not keeping pace. It's just not. And so the notion that one can live off of one paycheck,
Hmm. Yeah.
interesting. I mean, I've lived in a
Yeah.
family where it's never been the case for anyone. But at the same
Hmm.
time, it seems to be progressively worse. Like, yes, you've got a full-time job and you've got three things on the side and it's still tighter than it should be. Like it used to be gig economy was extra money. Now it's necessary money.
Yeah. I think so. I know
Problematic.
it is problematic, right? Because I think last week or the week before, another 23,000 jobs were lost. And wages for the first time in several years are now lower than inflation. So they had been running ahead of inflation even through the pandemic.
Mhm.
And now they've actually dropped below, which essentially means you're like losing money every day, right? So
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And if you're working full time, or if you're working full time plus participating in the gig economy, you're still losing money. You're just losing less
yep,
money.
yeah, yeah.
Incredible. Incredible.
All right.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right. We'll dip into that a little bit more, but I think it's highly likely our listeners are probably in the gig economy, whether they knew it or not.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed.
All right, let's dive into phase one. All right, Lisa, we called it. We called it. I know that it's not appropriate to say I told you so, but we're going to say it. I told you so. I told you so. So, a new report came out just this month, Lisa, that basically encapsulated a lot of things that we've talked about for the last couple of years now on this podcast in regard to bracing oneself for the current presidential administration, what could happen, what would happen. And here it is. The report says that DEI policies brought no financial penalty for companies that kept them. Okay, so no financial penalty. Now it's not as cut and dry as that title sounds there, but let's get into it a little bit, Lisa. So
Okay.
there were some companies, Lisa, that did have some moral fortitude here, that stuck by, didn't move, knowing that there would be risk involved. So those companies that chose not to cut their DEI programs and
Hmm.
so forth did not incur any financial penalties. And interestingly enough, corporations in the S&P 500 had DEI programs and they performed just as well in terms of stock market returns and revenues as
Okay.
firms that actually decided to wind down their DEI programs. And
Hmm.
so, they did not go through the dismantling or even quieting of their programs, and they saw no fundamental financial change. Now, Jacob Grumbach, who is associate professor at Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley, he is the author of this study, the principal researcher on the study. And the study said that markets do not punish firms for maintaining DEI. And we're talking
Hmm.
about folks that made no changes, like Apple, Costco, Delta Airlines, Dollar Tree. Those are some of the companies that had the moral fortitude not to make those major changes and
Hmm.
say, all right, let's roll the dice here. Let's see exactly what happens.
Right.
Nothing financially happened to them negative. Now, interestingly enough, the larger businesses, including Target, which I have not set foot oh, we're at 2.5 years now, 2.5 years.
Mm.
Target, Walmart, they actually did roll back their DEI efforts, and they're kind of the exception around not taking a hit financially. They took a huge hit, but remember, we did a whole podcast on boycotting.
Yeah.
There were lots of
Yeah.
organized resistance to those companies. And so, we really didn't see abnormal performance other than those that were specifically boycotted. And so
Hmm.
here's what I think is interesting. We're holding this understanding of Executive Order 14173, which is the anti DEI executive order that you and I went through as
Hmm.
soon as the ink was not dry yet on that
Yeah.
one. We
Yeah.
talked about it. And what I think is interesting, let's put on our data hat, Lisa, is that there is a business case for keeping DEI programs
Hmm.
because some
Hmm.
of them actually performed better
Yeah.
financially by keeping them. But we also have to weigh that with the theory around firms that are willing and equipped to take on the possibility of major, massive legal risk when it
Right.
comes to this. And
Right.
how comfortable are you with that? So if you got one attorney in a closet office, you got to think about it differently versus we have an entire legal team with 20 attorneys that are used to this every day. Yes, we know that anyone can sue anyone. However, we're better equipped to handle it if it does happen. And so
Right.
that's the consideration if you're a CEO or a CFO or a COO. What's the amount of risk, not if it can happen, because it can always happen. What's the level of risk you're willing to
Hmm.
tolerate as an organization? So, Lisa, I've been kind of dipping into the study, but what do you think of that thus far, given that we got a little bit of I told you so, but a little bit of eh, still tread with caution here.
Yeah. It is interesting because the markets, this like nebulous, the markets,
Mm-hmm.
right, have
Mm-hmm.
been really um, resilient, I think is the word that some economists use, in the sense that even though there is chaos and um, constant chicken in and out and changing policies and or risks to the Fed, they have stayed fairly well. Has stayed the course. Like there's been some dips, but they have also increased. And I think that that is at play here too. Like, so how do we think about the market as the large kind of aggregate, and that didn't limit or harm companies that stayed the course with DEI versus
Mm,
consumer sentiment, consumer behavior, um, because the average consumer isn't buying and selling stocks and trading, right? So
mm.
did this piece that you found, did it talk about if they were conceptualizing a difference between the market being this kind of larger macro related to stocks and such versus like individual behavior and choices?
Yeah, great question. They didn't talk a lot about individual behavior, but what I thought was interesting, let me scroll back up because I did pull up the study. It mostly spoke from a business to business
Mm-hmm.
model, if you will. So, what is the business doing broadly in their larger financial performance? So we're talking about like
Okay.
SIC codes and, that type of thing. And, what I think is interesting is that when they were looking for cumulative abnormal returns, which means,
Mm-hmm.
anything unordinary, and when you're looking at both the grid of reaffirming DEI firms versus controlled firms that kind of pulled back things, comparing that to DEI folks that were committed versus control firms. Again, it wasn't a huge, like the chart wasn't going like this. It was very controlled, very small. And so,
Yeah.
what I think is interesting is I don't think the report was written in such a way that it's speaking to people that would be trading, individually, but more so, hey,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Lisa, if you are the CFO or the CEO of another organization and you were thinking about what should you do, here's the trend. You can get
Right.
sued, but it's probably not likely. And by the way, your revenues will not fluctuate very much either. So it would help a C-suite decision maker who's trying to be
Mm-hmm.
committed to the guy to at least weigh their options and weigh their risk. Now, what I do think is interesting, though, from our point of view and from an individual point of view, that we should uh, hold organizations accountable for. Ooh, girl, look, this is right in our zone of genius, I believe we would say. Does it really matter? The question is, does it really matter when the study also dug up the notion that the DEI programs that they kept and some of the DEI programs that they rolled back didn't always have that much depth to them anyway?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Indicate of consumer loyalty, or is it a demonstration that y'all are acting like this DEI stuff is real deep in your organization, but it's actually not?
Right.
It's a matter
Mm-hmm.
of the branding or not having the pride stuff in the front, but putting it in the back, or like very surface level stuff rather than deep training, deep supervisor training, those types of things. I just think it's very interesting that the DEI programs were called into question as to did they really matter anyway if they didn't have deep roots down and across the organization.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fascinating part.
Yeah, but I also worry that this finding is also going to make those organizations that let go of DEI just be like, shrug, we didn't really pay a price for it, right? Our shareholders are still getting paid, the CEO is still getting a massive bonus. So it didn't matter. And so does the report both validate the organizations that kept the DEI, shallow or not, but also validate the organization that dropped it because there's no consequence? And they also didn't get
Well, I
sued
think,
and they sites,
yeah, I think, I do think it validates both of them actually, but at the same time, the people that you're bringing up are the people that as much as I hate to go here because you just can't measure it, the folks that weren't courageous and weren't dedicated anyway, it just gives them a reason to say, oh well, good, I got to be less courageous about this, and it didn't make a whole hell of a lot of difference. They were the people that were going to shy away from it anyway, versus the people that were willing to take the risk. And that then goes to, if they're paying attention, that goes to consumers who
Hmm.
consumers are looking to see what organizations had the courage to stay dedicated and to stay the course
Yeah.
for some. And so with that, yeah, it does validate, but at the same time, it tells us who you are, though. If you had them and you rolled it back, and
Hmm.
you're a consumer that cares about it, we're paying attention.
Yeah, there is a brand and a implication, certainly, but I would like to have seen Target's profits plummet significantly,
Oh, they
noticeably,
did. They
right?
did. Those were the exception.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
Target
oh,
was
you were
was
saying
one of the
Target and
exceptions.
Walmart were the exceptions. Okay.
There you go.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the thing is that there's a consequence, so all these people that are raking in money and don't give two shits about DEI, right? They're just concerned about getting a return on their investment. And if there's no financial
Mm-hmm.
penalty,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so,
Yeah.
we've talked about the power of the purse. So,
Mhm. Yeah, the so 2024 to 2025, when it came to Target specifically, their revenue dropped 1.68%, down by about 4 to 5 million from 2021. But again, look at that relatively small, relatively small slump, even under pressure, even under scrutiny, even under very organized boycott, that, yeah, they felt it and they tried to blame it on everything but DEI resistance. But they felt it, but they only felt it because there was pressure,
yeah, yeah.
or pressure and scrutiny.
Hmm.
So, and they are claiming to start to recover at the moment, because their net sales are now growing again. But that's also going back to a previous podcast that we had as well, around who called the quote unquote boycott off, or the Target fast off, and if it really was off or still on. So yeah, I think this study is interesting because it, in my opinion, to cut to what you were just saying, it
Hmm.
emboldens people to do exactly what they were going to do anyway if there was no response. If you were going to back off of
Right,
DEI because you wanted to and felt uncomfortable, you would do that. If you were going to press on with DEI because you felt comfortable, you're going to do that as well.
right, right.
And so,
Yeah.
is it really about a market? Is it really about the market itself, or is the market less relevant than aligned values? What's more important here?
Uh, I think that's going to depend on who you ask, probably.
Mhm. Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. So, because there were some organizations that said, of course, we don't want to lose revenue, but if we have to lose revenue to remain steadfast, then we're willing to do that.
Yeah. Hmm.
And they didn't have to, which is very cool.
Well, and the other thing, I guess, is so many of these organizations and universities and law firms bent the knee, right? They um, acquiesced in advance. That's not exactly the term that Timothy Snyder uses, but they did that. And now
Mhm.
these large organizations like a Delta, um,
Yeah.
they didn't bend the knee and they haven't seen any consequences, right? So it also kind of puts into relief the cowardice of all those
Mhm.
organizations that didn't fight a bit harder, right? That
Mhm.
settled on things that they hadn't really done wrong, but just to try and quote unquote keep the peace, but they perhaps didn't need to.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And depending on the future of your organization too, like, yeah, I probably would have to pause a bit if, for example, I'm a senior, C-suite leader, and I know that we're going to try to broker a merger in the future, and it
Hmm.
has to
Hmm.
be approved by the federal government and we're still pushing DEI, that is a risk that I need to measure. That are you willing to
Yeah,
say that
yeah,
EI is more important to me than the possibility of a merger that we really need being approved by the federal government? As long as you know what
right.
you're walking into, that's the type of
Hmm.
analysis we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I think it behooves decision makers that are in those C suites that do care about DEI to at least be aware that, yeah, you got some people out there that really weren't proponents of DEI. They may have done it as window dressing. But at the same
Hmm.
time, if you were serious about it, you did not take an extra hit as a result. So do what you would have
Yeah,
done
yeah.
regardless.
Hmm. Yeah. I do think there's
There's
multiple messages,
multiple.
but definitely some of them are good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, all right. Let's get into phase two.
Okay, so this is where we're circling back to the gig economy. So, as you mentioned at the top of the show, we have both been adjunct faculty at universities. I currently am an adjunct faculty member at a university. And middle of August, The Nation published this long kind of expose on adjunct faculty and the way that they are treated. And so they kind of begin the piece with universities now have more adjuncts than tenured and tenure track professors combined. The conditions are unsustainable for professors and students alike. So I sent that to you, and you were like, yes, of course. And it has been a problem for some time, but there has been a growing interest in addressing the fact that higher education appears to be more and more reliant on adjuncts. So, for those of you who don't know, an adjunct professor is someone who comes in and teaches a class, right? They get contracted class by class. Their classes could get cancelled at the last minute, so it's not a guaranteed income. They don't have anything, they generally don't have contracts longer than that single class. Um, they're cheaper because there's no benefits, so they pay per class, but you get no health benefits or retirement benefits or anything like that. And you get about $4,000 a class. That's the median nationally. So some people are getting less than that, and some people are getting more than that. And
Mhm.
so if you think about that, if I if you're on a semester and you teach 3 classes a semester, so 6 classes a year, so that's $24,000, um, which is just not a living wage anywhere. And 6 classes a year is a pretty decent amount, particularly if it's an undergraduate class and um, your class sizes are large and there's a lot of grading and preparation and stuff like that. So it's certainly not nothing, because I know some people would be like, just 6 classes in a year, right? But it is actually quite a lot of work. It's not just the amount of time you're in the classroom. There are many, many hours that are added on, working with students, grading, coaching, doing all of the preparation, that sort of thing. So it ends up being like a per hour price is pretty darn low. And
Mhm.
I think what struck me in this Nation piece, Shaunna, is that I have never heard adjuncts referred to as the gig economy of academia.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And that kind of
Mhm.
put a light bulb on. Like, I know conditions are
Mhm.
bad, I know they're treated poorly, and I know that they're hired more because they're cheaper, but thinking about it that way, these are people with
Mhm.
PhDs, with master's degrees, or not their educational qualification, but they have expertise in a field, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm. Oh
Um,
yeah. Mhm.
And so some
Absolutely.
groups of adjuncts at different universities have unionized. You worked at a school that had a unionized, um,
Yes. Mhm.
adjunct faculty were unionized, right? And
That's right.
so,
That's right.
but universities and colleges push against that. They don't want their adjunct unionizing, so that causes a huge issue. Um,
Exactly.
so I
Mhm.
just have a couple of stats here for you before I want to kind of hear from you. Approximately
Mhm.
650,000 adjunct faculty in 24, 25, so a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Mhm.
Adjunct faculty accounted for about 40% of higher education faculty workforce. So almost half of the faculty workforce across the country
Mhm.
is adjunct. And then this is interesting. 46% of faculty at private institutions are adjuncts, and it's 37 at public institutions. So the data shows that private institutions are more likely to hire adjuncts than they are tenure track or kind of professional faculty. And I'm an adjunct at a private university.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you
Mm-hmm.
thinking? How does this fit with your experience?
Yeah. I was adjunct for 10 years at a private university. So yeah, absolutely. Um, this is interesting to me because I wasn't really shocked that the numbers were high and higher than tenured track professors combined. Um, and the reason for that is because I've been in those dean's conversations, provost meetings around what the numbers really look like. And as far as those salaries that you have to pay, and even as far as, for example, Lisa, we know this to be true, especially research ones, even research two institutions, where let's say Dr. Lisa is tenured or at least associate professor, and she's now up for sabbatical. So, yes, we do need someone to come and teach in her stead for that semester or that year. And so, the more associate or full professors you have, obviously they're going to have more reasons to either buy themselves out of courses or rotate out for sabbaticals or rotate out for research. If you're at a research one or research two, that also means that you have more nationally well-known scholarship going on. So Dr. Lisa gets a Fulbright for a year. So of course we need someone else to teach in her stead while she's away because we still want to offer the same. So there's lots of variables and reasons as to why there is a legitimate case for adjuncts, but to this degree is another issue.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
we're not saying, please don't go run down the street and say that Dr. Lisa and I said no adjuncts. Of course, adjuncts, there's reason for that. But this number makes it egregious. And this goes back, Lisa, we talk about this constantly around the notion of, we're saying that, I lost my word. We are legitimizing that using and abusing part-time gig economy work
Mm-hmm.
is okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's my issue with that. It's not just using it, but using it and abusing it in such a way that
Mm-hmm.
it kind of cycles back to our vocational awe conversations around,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
you get to walk around and say that you are a faculty member at, I'm picking on folks, Georgetown, when you're
Mm-hmm.
teaching one class for $3,000 and putting in countless hours to
Yeah.
onboard it, teach the course, offload it. Like, no, we're I would suggest that many in higher ed or expats of higher ed are no longer impressed by the freaking vocational awe. And I
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
many moons ago, I think I shared this with you, Lisa, because here in the DMV area, especially in Washington, D.C. proper, there's enough institutions in what we kind of call the consortium. There's enough colleges and universities where you can try to piecemeal together what would be a full-time salary with the number of institutions that you are traversing in a semester.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not convenient. No, you don't get benefits, all these other things. But if I can get two classes at Howard and two classes at GW and one at American and then maybe one at George Mason, I might have the semblance of a full-time job without having any benefits, but it's much better than
Right.
nothing. Gig economy, right?
Yeah.
And so, with that, I think it's very telling as to how far a university is willing to push that vocational awe piece of things where now, this is now vocational exploitation. You are exploiting an entire group of
Yeah.
people who need the
Hmm.
flexibility, who are the ones that are available to teach in evenings and weekends. Lisa, if I'm not, well, you can explain to us how your situation worked, but for me, I was working full time at one university,
Hmm.
and for
Hmm.
10 years, I went to teach my course at another institution and it was one night a week for working professionals, and it went from 5:10 to 9:40 once a week.
Hmm.
Not a lot of money, definitely not a lot of money for a private institution, but at the same time, it was a great way to keep one foot in the classroom so that if I did need to
Yeah.
try to parlay into a full-time role, I had a consistent track record of being in the
Yeah.
classroom. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's all the way there to exploitation. It is cheap labor. And I think what's going to be really interesting is, are we in a situation that we can even turn it down? Because look at student loans and all the things that we need to take care
Yeah.
of, where we don't really want to say no to these positions. But yeah, it's definitely not a sustainable life. Let's put it that way.
Well, and I'm thinking as you're talking, there's been an onslaught of attacks on higher education this last couple of years, and I think the Department of Education, the
Mm-hmm.
Secretary of Education, just released a letter or a memo asking universities to do some things that made sense and other things that were just clearly political.
Yeah.
And there is data showing that of the people that are losing their jobs at higher education as a means to reduce the overall cost of higher education, it's administrators and staff. It's all of those people that provide the extra services that students and families have wanted. So that's getting cut
Mm-hmm.
away before tenure track faculty. But I can also see you have several long-term professors, hundreds of them. That is a
Mm-hmm.
huge line item cost, right? And you can only pare
Oh,
down
yeah.
staff and administrators so much before you have no one running the university. And so, at what point, if this pressure continues, is it going to shift to finding a way, like just to get rid of tenure, finding a way to move to more like 1 year contract based or just adjunct, as they're pushed to reduce the cost of higher education?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been one who had tenure and at the same time did not agree with tenure at the same time.
Mm,
So I've never really agreed with tenure, frankly, just haven't. I think part of it is the elitism of it, definitely, but
yeah,
also I had a major problem with um, when it comes to tenure and tenure track, how difficult it is to get on it. And especially going back to this very point, which even further demonstrates exploitation, we know what demographics many of those adjunct faculty members are:
yeah, yeah. Hmm.
women, women of color, people of color that are primarily adjuncts. And the
Yeah.
problem that I found is, so for example, not that I was looking for because I didn't want it, but let me give you an example. Let's say I've taught adjunct for 10 years at an institution. They have a position open for me, or a position open, not for me, position open full time. Let's say
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
apply to it. Let's say I get the full time position. None of those 10 adjunct years count towards the 10-year track. I am starting
Right,
fresh on the
right.
clock. People
Yeah,
are not willing to do that either because they feel like their previous work has not been honored to the very same institution,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so, given that, I think it's very much a slap in the face, and also I have a major problem with tenure, considering that many of the research interests of women, people of color, LGBT folks are not accepted in the academy. And so therefore, if you can't get,
Yeah.
it's published or perish. If you can't get published, so forth and so on, you're not going
Right,
to
right.
be tenured anyway. So there's a lot of systemic reasons, not has nothing to do with the scholar. It has to do with the system the scholar functions in, that I disagree with.
Hmm.
But all that to say, I think you're right that it's going to give great argument to why tenure needs to be phased out,
Hmm.
because universities can no longer afford it. They just can't afford
Yeah.
it.
I mean, one of the arguments about reducing access to student loans is, as I understand it, the Grad Plus loan in particular would
Mm-hmm.
flex to whatever amount a graduate student needed to pay the tuition. And so there was no incentive for schools to keep their tuition rates low because they knew that students could just get any loan that they needed to cover the
Any loan.
tuition, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
argument from this administration is, well, if we get rid of those loans and we cap what people can borrow, it's going to force institutions to reduce their tuition because people are not going to be able to afford to go. I don't know that I don't know that that will absolutely be the result. I understand the logic behind it, but part of what keeps tuition high is, I think, a bloated administrative staff because students
There you
and
go.
families
Mm-hmm.
have expected and wanted more and more and more. Plus, we have like much more significant mental health issues with students. But it's
That's
also
right.
tenure, right? It's also
Mm-hmm.
this group of people, they get paid a ton of money and they can't be fired. So what is a university willing to do if they want to remain sustainable and have students, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
so that's where
Yeah.
I think this
Yeah.
reliance on adjunct faculty, I don't think it's going to get better. I think it's going to get worse. And
Oh yeah.
certainly no
Agreed.
benefits are coming your way, right? It's just going
Mm-mm.
to
No.
continue to be an exploitative relationship. Yeah.
Well, and yes, exploitative relationship. And at what point at what point does the model completely change? Where
Mm,
instead of being a college or a university that's kind of cosplaying that yes, we want to be primarily full-time faculty with the necessary adjunct added on. Let's just say what it is. We are a college or university that is primarily staffed by adjunct. It is very rare to be
right.
full-time, much less tenured. And that is now our new
Hmm.
model. Um,
Yeah.
in such a way that still, which I doubt it can happen, but here we are, in such a way that that very same college or university can aspire to the R1 or R2 status that they want because they have
Hmm.
consistent instruction, academic freedom, a number of different things that have to happen to even throw your hat in the ring to be qualified to be at that ranking.
Right.
It can upend the entire model.
Hmm.
Um, I personally, even before I was an adjunct faculty member, I recall being an undergrad and a master's student and having some of my most pivotal classroom experiences with adjunct faculty because
Hmm.
they could literally talk about here's the coursework in the book and here's what literally just happened today in my industry. Now let's
Yeah.
compare the two. Like that was the fun of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That was the
Yeah.
fun of it. That's what made it interesting. That's what made it applicable and real. And so it, not that we're explicitly talking about race here right now, but just speaking in general about the history of higher ed in this country, the ivory tower is got some cracks in the foundation at this point now because it just, do we need to really just dismantle it and reassemble something different? I don't know.
You know what just popped into my head when you were saying that? The ivory tower, because ivory
Go
is
for it.
white. What is the origin of ivory tower for academia? Because, like, I mean, I understand like it's connected to elitism, but it's also interesting to me that the color of ivory is white and higher education has struggled, in perpetuity with having a racially diverse set of faculty, staff, and students.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's well, Ivory Tower in it's in song, I think it's in the Song of Songs, but it's scriptural. Where it
Okay.
talks about, yeah, and it talks about the purity of being in the Tour d'Ivoire, the ivory tower itself, and being separate and apart based on
Mm,
purity, based on specifically Mary, the mother of Jesus in Christian tradition, but being separate and apart from, and trying to compare that to academia and intellectual stuff. Like, let's be separate and apart and far
yeah.
away and very difficult to access. And that's exactly what academia does. So and purity,
Yeah.
that's somebody's
Yeah.
dissertation, something we need to talk about, but the purity of academia as well. So that's
Yeah.
really what it comes from. But even in that, I'm like, y'all know I'm an extremely, extremely skeptical but longtime Christian. And even there, I'm like, oh, interesting. Here we go once again with another abuse of Christian tradition to oppress people. Here we
Hmm.
go. Yet another
Yeah.
example. But that's where it comes
Whew.
from is Song of Songs.
Okay.
So
All right. Well, on that very educational
another
note, we should,
podcast.
yes, we should probably wrap up here, but good luck to all the adjuncts out there. I am with you. We are with you.
We are with you. That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Lisa, when you brought up the number really quickly about, I know it's not directly correlated, but there's something significant going on with that 650,000 adjunct faculty. I just read an article that
Hmm.
said 600,000 Black women are now no longer in the workforce because of lots of reasons. And I'm thinking, oh, that is a
Yeah.
very significant number. I'm wondering how much overlap is between the two
I wonder
groups
too. Yeah. Yeah.
broadly. But yeah, I worry. Of course, I worry. All right. So with that, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us on all of our social media platforms and our podcast apps at Unfazed Unedited with the brackets around the first un. You can email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com or just visit us at our website with all these episodes, unfazedpodcast.com. Both the old and the new shows are all there for you to go back and take a listen. So if you like this week's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, download, share it with your friends, co-workers, adjunct faculty, full-time faculty, anyone in this phase of your life. So till next time.
All right. See you next week.